Hello, and welcome to another episode of No Franchise Fatigue, the podcast where we like to celebrate cinematic franchises, even ones that only have remakes and no sequels or prequels whatsoever. And that's the ones that we're talking about today. I am your co-host, Matt, and once again, I am joined by my holiday-loving and slightly unhinged killer friend, Sean. How are you doing this evening?
Matt, I don't want to alarm you or the listeners, but you need to get out now. The podcast is coming from inside the house.
Yeah, that's funny. And I'm really excited. So, as your reference point, today we are talking about the Black Christmas films, and there are now 3 of these.
And all of them pretty wildly different.
And this is the Black Christmas franchise is almost exactly why I wanted to do this podcast with you.
Yes.
Because this is a franchise, but it is a franchise only made of remakes on an original, but each film distinctly carries the voice of its directors and writers in very weird ways.
Its era of particular storytelling too, because they're all very indicative of their particular generations. I will say broadly, although considering how inspirational Black Christmas 74 was to the slasher genre writ large, maybe not a fully fair thing to say there, but we'll get into that when we're there.
Absolutely. And I think that looking at each of these 3 Black Christmas films is going to be really fascinating just to compare and contrast and talk about how, like you said, they're each part of their own time period, but they also are influenced by the one previous. And so it's an interesting evolution to kind of see how they all kind of maneuver together. But I think this will be kind of a fun one to talk about. And I hope our audience out there has had a chance to kind of view them all. I know that the most latest one, Black Christmas 2019, is still in theaters. So please, if you get a chance, go check that out. It needs every bit of penny that you can throw at it at this point, whether it's good or not. And we'll get into that in a minute. But
I hate to see it be the first Blumhouse movie to actually be a full-on train wreck, though. That'd be sad.
It's weird, and we can get to that in a minute when we get.
We'll get there. We'll get there. It's a strange movie, though, for sure.
For sure, and I'm not saying that it's justified that it did so poorly in theaters. It's still a shock because even curious people should have doubled how much it made that opening weekend in the box office, just out of curiosity. So.
But best to start, of course, at the beginning. And how we always begin this is our relationship to the franchise. So, what is your relationship to the Black Christmas franchise?
I have to give full credit to my brother for my relationship to the Black Christmas franchise. I mean, when you look at the history of the original Black Christmas, the movie had a middling box office at best. It kind of was forgotten for decades. And it wasn't until at earliest the late 90s, but really more the beginning of the 2000s, of the aughts, that Black Christmas started to find its audience again. We got a DVD release. The audience kind of went back and reclaimed it as this lost classic, this lost slasher Canadian classic, right? Mm-hmm. And in this period, that's when my brother got into it, because he was really getting into horror films at the time, especially slashers. And he introduced me to a slew of films, particularly, like I said, the slasher orientation. And he was the one that got me onto this film. He was like, Matt, you got to see Black Christmas. You got to see Black Christmas again and again and again. And he's like, it's fantastic. It's got fucking John Saxon in it. You got to see it. So he eventually kind of swayed me to it, because I'm not a huge slasher fan to begin with. So.
Very, very telling of your family that he mentions John Saxon as the biggest star and not Margot Kidder.
Yeah, or fucking Olivia Hussey.
Yeah.
He's like a massive star at the time that this movie came out. So yeah, he's the one that he kind of convinced me to do it. I watched it. The first time I watched it, I liked it. I'm not sure I loved it, but it was a film I started revisiting again and again. And I've seen the movie probably a dozen times. In total, I've actually seen it 3 times in the last month, in the last 2 weeks, really, in various formats. But I adored this first movie, and this was kind of my introduction. And quickly after that, they announced the Black Christmas remake for 2006. And I remember seeing that, and I didn't see that one in theaters. I saw that one on home video. And then obviously the newest one, I was sold on it, got to see it in theaters, and definitely we'll get to talk a little bit about that. But I'm actually curious, how did you come into the holiday season of Black Christmas?
So I came into it in the other direction, having seen Black Xmas first. And I caught it in theaters just because that was my era of horror. And so I did round back to the original, which I appreciated. And obviously, as I reviewed it for the site, I was first in line to see the remake. And as you said, we will discuss all those films as they come. But this is one series I've just always enjoyed purely on the level of I just really love a good holiday horror. And in a lot of ways, Black Christmas is the first. It was the first real holiday horror film as they exist now. And just anyone who's a fan of horror history, and we'll touch on this more in a second, but it's also really, in a lot of ways, one of the first modern slashers. It predates Friday the 13th. Friday the 13th honestly stole a lot of its style from this.
Well, in the history of slashers, it predates Halloween. This is 1974.
There's a long-running theory that John Carpenter was inspired by a conversation he had with the director of Black Christmas about what a sequel to Black Christmas would have looked like. And that evolved into Halloween, which, you know, whether or not you believe that story, you can see the DNA there. The inspiration's certainly there.
Absolutely. I think the same way that, you know, we can debate hotly in the timeline of things of who saw what, who stole what, you know, and I don't think in this conversation it's super relevant, particularly because director Bob Clark of the original Black Christmas 74
and Christmas Story fame.
Yeah, well, and he's also quite the fibber. I mean, rest in peace, Bob Clark. He made a lot of interesting films in his career, but he certainly did not hesitate to take credit for things, even if they were warranted or not. He loved to do that. So, but I think we're kind of already jumping into Black Christmas. So why don't we talk a little bit about this film? And as always, for our listeners out there, we do chat about spoilers in our analysis of these films and our analysis of our franchise. So if you have not seen Black Christmas 74, Black Christmas 2006, or Black Christmas 2019, and you are worried about spoilers, please go ahead. You can just pause the podcast now, go see those films before you check it out. And then that way, when you listen to us, you can have a little bit of a dialogue in your head about whether or not you agree with us, or, you know, whether or not you would like to add something to us to what our analysis is. So just a nice little spoiler warning there for everybody. But
bearing
let's
all
jump
that,
in.
what, Matt, pray tell, is Black Christmas specifically about?
Black Christmas 1974 is about a sorority house filled with young women in college. They are going into Christmas break. There are a few of them there that are left. Most of them have left at this point to go home, to go back to their families. There's a handful left over Christmas break. And during this time period, as they're looking into it, they start getting some obscene phone calls from an unhinged gentleman who refers to himself as Billy. The film then proceeds to go through a series of events where a young woman is found dead in the park. We find out Billy is in the house. This is not a spoiler, actually. This is something that's told to you straight ahead, right in the beginning of the film, that Billy is in the house. He's been hiding in the attic. He's making these obscene phone calls from inside the house. Eventually, a bunch of the girls get killed in the house, and then the police are brought in. We have an investigation. The final girl ends up kind of uncovering the plot, if you will. There's no real resolution to said plot, But she uncovers a lot of everything. And then the film ends when the police actually take away the body of her dead boyfriend at the end, who is mistaken as the killer for Billy.
Which leads straight into a few of the things I particularly like about this movie. First and foremost, it's the killer is always shot from first person, which has the doubled effect of being very creepy and kind of voyeuristic and never letting us see the killer. We never get any kind of honest chance to know what he looks like. The movie also has some legitimately interesting kills for a 70s movie. A woman gets stabbed to death with a crystal unicorn, for God's sake.
And not just any woman, Margot fucking Kidder.
Yeah, Lois Lane herself.
Lois Lane herself gets killed by a crystal unicorn. That is her kryptonite in this film. I'm sorry, I had to say that. But you're absolutely right. And we talked briefly earlier that in the history of film that Black Christmas is, one of the early slashers. A proto-slasher, is sometimes it's referred to. It's very obvious to me watching this film that Bob Clark or somebody was definitely influenced by Giallo. The first person shots of the killer, not knowing the identity of the killer. It's kept a secret as almost a murder mystery in many ways.
Well, hell, down to having an ending that kind of trails off like an ellipsis.
Yeah, and so there's a lot of that influence. And so if you're a Giallo fan going into Black Christmas, it's almost a better Giallo film than it is a slasher in many regards because of the stylistic choices that are made for it. And as you mentioned, Bob Clark, as a director, was known for a variety of films, including another very famous Christmas film, Christmas Story. He was known for a lot of comedy later on in his career. I mean, he did a lot of good and terrible films. He started off in horror and then he kind of moved on to comedy and other things. And I think that that's, for me, the reason why this movie is so good is that it's a horror film, but it has all these other elements that are leaked into it. A murder mystery, a little bit of comedy is definitely prevalent in this film through a couple of characters.
Some inadvertent feminism. This movie takes place literally a year after Roe v. Wade, and there's a major plot point about a woman who wants to get herself an abortion.
Yeah, and it's not even just subtle. It's a very potent plot point for our main girl, for the main heroine of the film, that she wants to have this abortion. Her boyfriend does not agree with it, and in fact, pseudo threatens her at times with it. And it's her major character arc in this film, and it's also the reason for the red herring of the boyfriend.
That's why I believe he's the killer.
Yeah. But I agree. I think that this movie does a lot of interesting things, particularly in its narrative.
I would say that the slasher as we know it was definitely like a hard combination of Black Christmas, Psycho, Halloween, Friday the 13th. And somewhere in that alchemy, the slasher as we know it kind of evolved.
Right. Absolutely. And that's why a lot of fans refer to this film as a proto-slasher. It does defy a lot of the slasher tropes in many ways, and it helps define others in other ways, including, as you said, I think it's important that we do go back, as you mentioned, to the killer Billy. Yes. And his identity, and that it's a hidden identity. You're absolutely right. The film intentionally leaves his identity very vague. You see it through his first person viewpoint. You see his hand. You see his eye at one point. The scene that you mentioned with the death scene where he kills the young woman with the crystal unicorn, the shot of him lifting it above his head is completely in shadow except for part of his face where his eye is. And that is an incredible visual shot you only see one eye. And I think that that's a really powerful moment. And it's powerful that there's this idea of the faceless killer.
And I think there's equally powerful the motiveless killer.
Yeah, we hear on the obscene phone calls that he makes to the girls, he uses multiple voices, which are provided by different actors and actresses.
He does
throughout it.
my personal bar pickup lines.
Yes, he uses quite obscene foul language in it.
It's really, it is a horrible, actually. And props, jokes aside, and very seriously though, definite props do deserve to go to this movie for interesting kills, which I'm going to touch on because that's always a thing for me anyway, and for making these phone calls legitimately scary. Like, it's not, they're funny to joke about, and it's easy to kind of giggle and titter because yeah, he's using, you know, deeply obscene language. But as the movie goes on and his voice starts getting different characters, it starts getting really, really upsetting, like deeply, like you're hearing a maniac speaking to you.
No, absolutely. And it's set up initially right away. The first phone call they get, because they mention that he's been a moaner. They call him a moaner. The moaner is calling again. So he's been making these calls, but they haven't been maybe necessarily as obscene to that point. But the first call in the movie, they all gather around to listen, all the women in this sorority house. And they gather around to listen, and he's doing all these weird noises and voices and referring to somebody named Agnes, and things like that. And then when Margot Kidder gets on the line and starts kind of talking back at him, being like, you know, stick your tongue in a socket, that'll give you a charge, is something that she says to him, which is a funny line in itself. He then responds back, I'm going to kill you. And it's the most rational thing he says. It's in a calm voice. And you feel like that's the real Billy at one point, because it's the one thing he says on the phone that's not this gobbledygook mishmash of different like pieces of dialogue and things like that. And he says, I'm going to kill you. And it's very calm and straightforward. And that makes it terrifying. That makes it so much more terrifying.
And speaking of the kills, also in this movie, a very, very well shot, like pulley hook swung at the dorm mother's head. And this is very much a 70s movie in the sense that there's no impact shots in the movie. All the violence is technically implied. So the way it's shot, though, like you feel it as if there is an impact shot. It's really very grisly, not visceral, but it's grisly for sure.
And the film gets a lot of criticism as a slasher because of its rather uncreative kills in a lot of ways, which I don't agree with. I actually think the kills are relatively creative. I mean, you have a hook and pulley for the attic, and I don't know any attic that has a hook and pulley. I mean, I get why it's there to pull up furniture or whatever, but like, what a weird thing to have in an attic.
No, and I mean, the only kill in the movie you could say is even slightly generic is maybe the bag over the head, because that was a thing in a lot of 70s movies, actually. But for what it's worth, the way it's shot in this movie is particularly gnarly.
Yeah. And I think Bob Clark nails that. He nails this balance between creating a film that is really intentional and intense. There's a lot of atmosphere to go around in this film. And he shoots it to build up those moments. So like, even as you mentioned, the mother, the house mother who goes up into the attic and then gets hit with this hook and pulley, we know he's in the attic. We've known that since literally the first minutes of the film, where we see from his point of view shot that he climbs the lattice work on the outside of the place to get into the attic outside of the house,
I guess.
But anyway, that's what he climbs up and he gets in the attic. So we know he's in the attic initially. We already know that he's there. So when she starts to go up there, we're like, oh my God, he's up there. You cannot go up there. And, you know, of course, she has no idea. It's the classic Hitchcock maneuver, right? Showing them something and then letting the audience worry about it. And he builds up that tension really nicely. And then even that sequence where he grabs that hook and pulley and he pulls it back to swing it, and he just holds it there. And it's like held there for like 10 or 15 seconds as she's looking around. And it's not until she sees him that he drops it and lets it hit her.
Yeah.
And then, as you said, it doesn't actually show the impact. It just shows her legs. Like,
it's slowly getting dragged up. Yeah.
It's slowly dragged up. Oh, great. Bob Clark impeccably shoots this film and creates so much tension that those kills do pay off. Even if you said, like you said, the bag thing is kind of maybe the least impressive sequence, but that's also followed up by having this dead woman with the bag over her head sitting in a rocking chair in the window of the attic the entire movie, and nobody notices her sitting.
And so, yeah, no, very much a foundational movie, very, very much a good movie. I could understand why a critic would detract from it, but I would argue they're largely coming from a perspective of someone that grew up with a more modern movie. Because if you put yourself in its time, this movie's definitely a revolution. And really pretty solid. It is a very solid film for what it is, as long as, like you said, you're the kind of fan that accepts a movie without like a solid resolution.
Right. Well, and I think we should definitely dig into that, because the most iconic thing about this film, despite, I love that the font of the title card is the same font as White Christmas, the classic Christmas film.
Yeah.
Great choice on that part. Again, part of the kind of dark humor that's in this film. There's a lot of key moments. The bag over the head, her in the attic, is an iconic moment. But really, the unresolved ending is truly what makes this movie really impactful and leaves a lingering moment with its audience. And so I do think that we should talk about the final, not just the final act, but the final like 5 or 10 minutes of this film are just really impactful. So what do you think about the unresolved ending?
I think that it's great. I think that it is what makes this a horror movie at the end of the day. I do understand in the Italian genre sense of the word, it falls more as a murder mystery. But for more American storytelling tropes, like an unresolved ending is just kind of a refreshing slap in the face for an American film. Doesn't tie up everything in a bow. And there, like I said earlier, is something just scary about the lack of motivation. We never know what Billy's deal is.
Yeah. And that's frightening in itself, right? That's been rediscovered in recent years through movies like The Strangers,
Mm-hmm.
where their reasoning for this attack on the house was because they were home.
They were home.
That was it. And we don't know if that's real or not, but that's a frightening because it's not a motivation. That is just happens. So, okay, so for the audience out there who hasn't seen it, just a recap of it, what we find out is that the killer is in the house. He's been making the obscene phone calls from the house. The police are on their way. We have the final girl, played with a lot of gravitas by Olivia Hussey, who was known as a very, very fine high art actress at the time. She's the last girl in the house. She has made her boyfriend mad over the talk that we talked about earlier about her wanting to have the abortion for her pregnancy. And she is panicking. She goes to find her friends. Her friends are dead. Billy starts to attack her. At this point, she grabs a poker from, a wood poker from the fireplace, heads to the basement to escape Billy, who is just slamming on the door and screaming obscenities and gook, things like that. Her boyfriend then shows up to speak with her, sees her panicked in the basement, kicks out a window, comes into the basement to speak with her. The cops then arrive. They show up. They go down to the basement. They find he is dead on top of her. He's bloodied, and she is in shock. And then they take her upstairs. They put her in. They assume that he was the killer. At that point, they
were in the house, in bed, tucked in nicely.
Yep. She's in the house. The cops then have some moments where, like, the dad of one of the girls faints, and they all end up leaving the house. There's a guard in front of the house. They all end up leaving the house to run to the hospital to take bodies to the morgue and things like that. We are then left with her by herself in the house. The camera slowly pulls back. It shows all the empty rooms in the house, which is a very haunting sequence of like all of these girls who no longer are alive and the lives they just left behind in these rooms. It then pans up to the attic. It goes back up to the attic. It shows that the cops, in all of their brilliance, have still not discovered the two bodies in the attic, which includes the house mother and also the friend with the bag over her head who's still sitting in the fucking window with a candle in the window, which is the candle in the window is just this nice little dark comedic touch. The shot then pulls back out. We see the face of her face in the window. It slowly pulls out. We see the cop in front. We hear the phone start ringing again. Yep. And that's when the credits roll. There's no music over the credit. It's just the phone ringing. And it is this haunting thing where Billy was not caught and he is still calling the goddamn hound. And like, it gives me goosebumps. I'm like getting goosebumps just thinking about it because this moment is just so haunting and so good. So that is the end of this film. I think it's astoundingly good. I love that they mistaken the boyfriend, the red herring, which is kind of the murder mystery aspect of it and how it turns it on.
I even kind of love that the last shot is credits rolling over the cops pulling away. It's specifically of the cops pulling away from the sorority house. And there's something about that that does just make me laugh.
Leaving her there in the state of shock, and they had given her drugs or whatever to make her sleep. She has no idea Billy's still in the house because you hear the phone ringing, so we know he has not left the house, or we assume that maybe it's ringing for some other reason, but it leaves everything vague and open, and it just leaves this kind of like sense of dread that never has alleviated the whole movie. Now, as a huge fan of this movie, like I said, I've seen this a dozen times, if not more. My big question is, why did Jess, the main character played by Olivia Hussey, kill her boyfriend in the basement? And I want to pick your brain on it. Why do you think he is dead in the basement?
You see, what's funny is, in my head, it was always Billy that killed him and left his body on top of her, which is what left her in the state of shock. However, if we're looking into the themes of the movie, it would be an awfully convenient situation for this otherwise completely innocent girl to get this otherwise overbearing asshole out of her life.
And, you know, I've had this discussion with a few people, and I'm always curious because everyone has a weird, different interpretation of this. But yeah, it could very well be because Billy could not get in the door. He was slamming against the door. It was locked. And then he disappeared, and that's when the boyfriend showed up. So yes, Billy could have, but then Billy left her alive. Maybe that's because the cops showed up. Maybe it's not. Maybe the boyfriend attacked her, because we understand the boyfriend was very upset with her. He says, "You'll be sorry," at one point about this. You know, maybe he attacked her and she ended up killing him. Maybe she just took an opportunity to make her life a little bit simpler. But I think, again, the way that Bob Clark shoots this movie, that kind of an ending, that's even before we see whether or not Billy might still be in the house. That leaves such this huge question mark about the morality of anybody in this film. Because we have seen throughout the film, most of the adults, I'm going to say adults with quotes around it, because like the police officers, the parents and things like that are kind of inept at their job, you know, whether it's the front desk man who, you know, at one point John Saxon tells him you can't even pick your nose without instructions on how to do so. But, you know, most of the adults in this film outside of the sorority girls are idiots, and they're portrayed as such. So it's a fascinating turn of events to have her kind of take advantage of that, if that's what it is. But I like that the film, whether or not you want to assume whatever ending there is, that this ending leaves so much open.
It almost feels like a less jokey Keystone Cops version of Last House on the Left, which the biggest problem with that movie for me has always been that specific, like, it's such a dead serious movie until you get to the police investigation, and then it's this Benny Hill routine, and it's so frustrating for me. And this is definitely toned down, but it feels like it's in the same kind of space.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's not that you don't care, because John Saxon seems like he's doing all the right things, right, you know, by doing the phone tap and everything like that. And John Saxon brings a lot of gravitas to the movie too. This film has a phenomenal cast, period. Even though Margot Kidder is essentially only in the first half of this film, she completely owns this movie. She is a fantastic as the foul mouth.
Feeding wine to the kid is hysterically funny to me.
I think I think the little son of a bitch is snockered or whatever she says about it. So good. She's so good in it. I'm sure she was drunk all day on set anyway. Again, rest in peace. I'm her life was kind of its own tragedy in its own way, and I feel for her in those ways. But I've kind of heard that.
Great performances, and this is one of them.
Yeah, absolutely. Even though she always said that horror films were beneath her, I think often referred to this film very negatively. But she's great in it, and Olivia Hussey brings a lot of seriousness to the film. She carries a lot of especially the second half of the film, really well. But John Saxon you have in it, and all kinds of great casting.
So, all that beautiful atmosphere and subtlety and obscurity you like about this movie?
yeah, everything I love about this movie.
Let's go ahead and just throw that on out the window. And let's talk about Black Xmas. Black Christmas 2006, stylized on most of the posters and covers as Black Xmas, although in the movie is technically called Black Christmas in the most generic possible font for 2006, which is for a horror movie, it's just this like scratched in font. It's wonderful.
Yeah, considering the Black Christmas 74 used the original White Christmas font, like that old school, almost calligraphy style font, so good. And then this one does really have a super generic font.
So, in Black Christmas 2006, Billy Edward Lenz, a boy born with severe jaundice.
I'm sorry. Keep going.
is constantly and savagely abused by his mother. As he grows up, his mother kills his father, ends up marrying this other guy who is impotent. So she sexually abuses Billy as well and ends up having a sister-daughter with him. And then he kills her really, really, really badly. The whole family, really, except for the daughter, who he only removes the eye. And that's all just kind of in the backstory of this movie that treats everything in the original as... This is sort of Rob Zombie's Black Christmas, in its way. So moving forward with the plot, it is in a lot of ways similar. Billy breaks out of a mental institution and is hiding in the attic of his childhood home, which is now a sorority, where at Christmas time, girls are leaving for the holiday, start getting phone calls, although that particular aspect is a little more pigeonholed in this. It feels more like it's there because it had to be more than it's actually written in properly. A lot of that being a problem with the modern era and cell phones. But moving right forward, the movie does basically hit the same notes. He starts murdering sorority girls and figure out that the killer's inside the house. Slightly different way. They don't have as much police assistance in this movie. It's a lot lazier. And then we end up, after a chase in the house, we end up burning the house down. Then we end up in the hospital where the two killers pop back to life, because we discover, of course, in the attic that both Billy and his sister have been killing, because this was the era of the secret two killer reveal. And both the killers survive, because this is also the era of the killer always comes back reveal. And there's a big showdown in the hospital where both of the killers are unambiguously killed, and then the credits roll. So
the end.
The end. So let me start off by saying that I know everything about how I gave that synopsis was deeply blasé, but for whatever it's worth, the stuff in between does work for me. This is just a gory, silly, stupid, over the top horror movie of its era, complete Scream era slasher. If you told Kevin Williamson didn't write it, but if you told me he had, I would very much have believed you.
Absolutely right. This, in the early aughts, is when we started getting, almost to an extent, the post-Scream, where Scream has had its influence on things. Like you said, the dual killer bringing in, and correct me if I'm wrong, her name is Agnes in this, right? The
Yes.
sister, daughter.
Yep.
Which,
interesting
but,
attempt to tie back, yeah.
yeah, absolutely. Well, and that's the thing, and maybe this is where we can kind of start doing our analysis, is how this takes what it needs to from the original Black Christmas. It has your killer Billy. It has the backstory with Agnes, which, supposedly in the original Black Christmas, Bob Clark did come up with this extensive backstory for Billy that included a sister named Agnes that the mother had killed, or something to those regards. So we did get that the Agnes is a family relation of some sort. So all of that is in there. You do get the sorority house and the killings and the phone calls. You get the basic plot outlines of it. But this is also what kind of makes Black Christmas 2006 an interesting film. Now, I say interesting because I'm not sure I'm willing to call it a good film.
That would certainly be a stretch, but I will tell you, it's a gory film. This is, for every impact that the original didn't show, this one shows 3. It is like the Hydra of making up for gore.
Absolutely. And I mean, it uses its gore to some unique effect. I mean, I've never seen a movie with so much shit about eyeballs. It's like that was the one thing they took. It's like,
I don't
his
know
eyeballs.
what this dude's deal with eyeballs was, but holy shit, he rips out a lot of them.
He rips out so many eyes. And, in the first one, you had this idea that he was kind of this, like you said, voyeuristic, and that he was spying on these girls and he could hear what they were saying and was using it against them. And you do get the one shot where you see his one eye as he's doing the kill sequence with Margaret Kidder in the original. And it's kind of like director Glenn Morgan of this one had seen that and decided, you know what, like, we're going to run with the eye thing. We're going to do as much eye shit as possible. He's fucking taking eyes. He's like little voyeuristic, like peepholes throughout the household are just everywhere.
Where he pokes himself one through the grout of the floor of the bathroom is legitimately hilarious. Because they're taking a shower, so he's just like, boop, and he just pokes like straight through it, pops the tile up. It's legitimately hilarious.
It is, and it also goes into, like you said, there's
and in a argument for better filmmaking than it might get credit for. The cinematography is actually pretty decent because, for example, that is your gratuitous shower scene for the era, but it is shot at a low angle, Dutch angle specifically, so you get an idea of what he's seeing it from. For example, so they do kind of homage the killer perspective thing too.
Well, and I think in this film is silly as hell, right?
Oh, it's completely ludicrous. If I may, like, some of the kills in this are just glorious. He literally cookie cutters his mom's back, takes the fleshy bits, bakes them, and the cops just walk in on him and casually eating these jerky bits like they're cookies. He's dunking them in milk, for God's sake.
Well, and as silly as this movie is, and it gets chastised for it by the horror community a lot. And I get it. Even when it first came out, my brother and I saw it, and we were both kind of like, "Oh, this is way fucking different," in tone and feel. It's also what kind of sets it aside, and it's kind of the reason that over time I've grown to enjoy this film. So, as for what it is, because it's a mess, but it is a highly entertaining, frantic mess, and it's got a lot of style.
And it's, hey, you know me, putting a hat on a hat. It's a mess in a very visceral, literal sense too, because I am not even a little bit kidding. This is a gory ass movie. at one point, one of the eye rips, he says, "Now it's my family," and then takes the eye and just eats it, squishes it like a grape into teeth, and it's like awesome.
Right. Well, and I think
But awesome.
it's one of those things that, and we discussed this on our top lists for horror films when we discussed Suspiria. But if you can't beat the original at what it does, then don't do it. Do it different. And I think Glenn Morgan rightfully, and I mean, I like Glenn Morgan. He also directed another horror remake for Willard with Crispin Glover.
Right. Yep.
Which is a really good remake in itself. But he was also known for doing the X-Files. So the guy isn't stupid. He knows how to kind of make a smart decisions in a lot of ways. But he really runs with this film.
Wrote Final Destination, which famous for its kill scenes as well.
Right, exactly. And so he brings an energy to this film that's, I mean, the bold use of Christmas colors.
Mm-hmm.
The one thing about the original Black Christmas 74 is that it's pretty realistic. It's very 70s in those terms. It's gritty and it's pretty grounded in a lot of what it does, even if it's stylish. This film, not at all. It's not grounded at almost any point. It's completely out of there. And he just runs with it. He's like, yeah, you know what? The killer, not only does the killer have this extreme jaundice, the guy looks like Yellow Bastard from Sin City.
Sin City, yeah, I know. Right.
And it's such a bold choice that you're like, wow.
Reveal when you see it as an infant where they like deeply over color correct because they can't put makeup on an infant. So suddenly this baby's bassinet is this bright Joel Schumacher Batman purple. And that's kind of hilarious in its own right.
Yeah, and he does those things like the memories of Billy's past, which one of the great things about Black Christmas 74 is that we don't know anything about Billy. Nothing. There is nothing. We were never told anything. It's never, the murder mystery is never uncovered. And in here, immediately they're like, here's Billy. And
earlier, this is the literal opposite. We have zero questions about why this. As a matter of fact, it's almost worse than the Rob Zombie thing because we have Billy's backstory back to infancy.
Yeah, Rob Zombie's only went back to like when he was 10. So. Yeah. Rob Zombie's Halloween as well. For listeners out there who don't know what we're referring to, Rob Zombie's Halloween also goes into an origin story for the killer, which was not in the original. So, and yeah, but I mean,
love it or hate it, it is objectively deeply unnecessary. And
yeah,
as a matter of fact, I would argue Black Christmas goes into grosser territory because, like this kid's mom like objectively rapes him, and it's like really graphic and very upsetting.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And like I said, Glenn Morgan does not hold back in this film, whereas, you know, the original Black Christmas is an exercise in not showing things. We're not telling things or being very smart about what it says. This film puts everything in front of you in the screen. And good or bad, it's a fucking choice. And it's a bold choice. And part of me loves this movie because of it, because you're just like, what the fuck?
And it's actually another pretty solid little cast. It's a pre-Arrow Katie Cassidy, and I know I'm speaking from the nerd world. I know she was in some other shows before Arrow, but that's what I know her from. It's got a post-Buffy Michelle Trachtenberg and Mary Elizabeth Winstead, like right before she popped.
It's funny is I haven't seen this film in probably 10 years before rewatching it for this. And as I was watching it, the cast was coming up and I was like, holy shit, I know every one of these people in this movie. It is a who's who of up and coming talent
that
for
era.
A lot of these young women.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And so, you know, in a way, this movie has aged better because of it, because you can go back and see these people in kind of the early parts of their career, because so many people get their start in the horror genre as they get going. But seeing all of these young people, you know, Mary Elizabeth Winstead, who at the time of the recording this has a huge movie coming out early next year with Birds of Prey, even though she's a smaller role in it, she has become a cult icon in many ways. And genre queen. Yeah. Well, yeah, Scott Pilgrim, 10 Cloverfield Lane.
Oof.
She's so good in that.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, this is a huge cast of a who's who of up and comers. And even then, like I said, Glenn Morgan is not. I mean, he hasn't directed a lot of stuff. He stuck to TV, and he did, like I said, he did another horror remake and things like that. But he's never directed a lot of things. He's pretty happy doing his writing and producing and things like that. But I I'm weirdly defensive of Black Christmas 2006. I as a remake, does I think it work? It takes some of the concepts and it runs with it in different directions. Do I like it more than Black Christmas 74? No, not at all, not even close. But as much as people hate this film, I don't think it's that bad.
But I actually think both it's a successful remake and like you said, I'm always going to respect a movie that makes choices, and this movie, Glenn Morgan certainly makes them.
He makes insane choices, big, bold choices that he makes in this. And the fact that they kind of let him run with it, and granted, I know you've mentioned multiple times how much gore the film has. As you mentioned, the home video release of this was stylized as Black Xmas because it was the unrated cut, like almost like an X-rated cut of the film. So because I didn't see it in theaters, I don't think I've ever seen the cut that isn't the unrated cut.
That's funny. Same.
And I don't know if I want to, because that was kind of the fun of this movie, is just how fucking extreme it is.
Billy getting kicked onto the Christmas tree and gutted on it as the capper shot of this movie is just like my little gorehound heart sings, because it is like so gnarly. It's like his intestines are tinsel around this tree. It's so great.
Yeah, it is a completely different film than the original, but in its own way, I think and especially with time, it's kind of found its cult audience with time, including myself. I've definitely been more open to it as time has gone on, and have come to oddly defend the film in arguments that I have with my friends who are much more sticklers to quote unquote good cinema than I am. But I think Black Xmas or Black Christmas 2006 is certainly a film to check out, even if you like the original. I would recommend it to those who want to see just a batshit insane film. Well, and as we said, each of these films kind of goes into the time period that they were made. You have the 70s, and now we have
the early aughts.
Mid aughts, I guess, 2006. And now we should probably move to the most modern film, which is Black Christmas 2019. Now, this film, once again, features a sorority house of young women who are going on to Christmas break. This time, though, they are, how should I put it, attacked by a frat house, also on the campus. It's probably the safest way to put that. But in the film, we have the young women start to come under attack from these masked intruders in hoods. Come to find out, they are new inductees to this frat that they have recently put on a show and attacked for their conduct towards women. And they have put on display for that. And so this frat house these young pledges have come to their house and started attacking them. It is soon revealed that there is a supernatural element to this, that a recently moved statue of the college founder has been moved into their house and has been steeping this black material that has turned all of these men into extreme alpha male, who have then proceeded to take their anger and lust out on the young women of this campus. They are trying to make the young women submit to their ways, and the sorority women then have to fight back against them in a clandestine showdown of strange proportion. So, Black Christmas 2019. Where do we even start with this? We should just start at the beginning, right? Let's talk a little bit about how this one is a response to the previous two Black Christmas.
So, in an interesting way, Sophia Takal kind of taps on, and her writing partner, I believe, is April Wolf.
Yeah.
Kind of pick up on a thread you and I briefly touched on in the original Black Christmas, which is that it was an incredibly progressive feminist film for its time. They picked up this thread and they just sprint with it. And this movie challenges you from the first 3 minutes, and it's like, do you know what a Diva Cup is? Because there you go. And you know what? Actually, this is the aspect of the movie I deeply applaud. It's just interesting. This stuff is not going to get equalized out until we have a few of these more extreme movies, and then it'll find its groove. This is very, very in your face with this, modern feminism thing, but I don't think any of that is inherently any of the problem with this movie at all. It's commentary on sexual assault culture on college campuses and stuff is very, very sharp, and it's very, very relevant. And I think in those ways, it's trying to kind of capture the spirit of Black Christmas. But obviously, I am just sprinting circles to try and say nice things about this movie because holy shit.
I like how you laugh because you look like you're going to cry. So what I'll say about this is that the first two acts of this movie, I absolutely agree with you that this film takes the spirit of what the original Black Christmas had to say in its first two acts. I also agree that
getting mysterious DMs on your cell phone is a really nice update to the callers or the killers in the house thing, for example.
Absolutely. As a throwback film, in many ways, the first two acts are a throwback. Sophia Takal has a very 70s style to this film. The way that she uses zooms and focuses, like visually gives the film an older feel, which is a really nice counterpoint to its modern themes. Now, again, in the spirit of the original Black Christmas and in the spirit of Black Christmas 2006, this film takes bold choices and does not apologize for them. And so, in that manner, like Black Christmas 2006, I have to give it credit for that. And I have to say that I actually, in some regards, really enjoyed the first two acts of this movie.
And by the way, if I may interject, special props to Carrie Elwes for a performance that instead of being big, silly, and campy, is legitimately I need a shower slimy. The way he uses his position to intimidate this one girl specifically is disgusting and more believable than I'm honestly comfortable with. I'm like, I'm sure Carrie Elwes is a nice guy, but boy, he played that well.
Absolutely. And I think that actually goes back to the original Black Christmas. And I mentioned briefly that most of the adults, again, in quotes, the adults in that film are relatively inept. I mean, even the police who are doing their best and are doing stuff honestly, John Saxon being the prime example of that, leave two fucking dead bodies in the attic and a young woman at the end, like by herself, who just went through this. And so there's a lot of ineptness. This film, in that same spirit, also showcases the adults, again in quotes, the adults in this film, or the people that are in authority, as either inept or manipulative. And it kind of follows that same spirit again. And I, again, kind of enjoyed that. I liked that there was this idea that, that these women were kind of on their own.
And
that's scary, especially as the film approaches its problematic campus culture, frat boy. At one point, even the campus guard says, well, boys will be, you know what they're going to say. It's like he says it, he still believes it, and he tries to cover it up, but he still believes that sentiment rings true. And this film, I actually think, it makes some bold choices. I don't think it's as heavy-handed in its feminist punching in the face as Charlie Angel's.
As a matter of fact, in a way, I also respect that instead of the typical feminist empowerment situation, it took the almost more horrifying and very, very much more realistic path of the main character, portrayed very well by Imogen Poots, who's great in this movie. Having been sexually assaulted a year ago, having reported it, and having specifically been not believed. And that is a very hard, very real kind of modern thing.
Yeah, it's a choice in this film for that character that, it's, and I'm sure we'll get some splashback from some listeners about this, because this is kind of a political viewpoint. I take it more as a social commentary on, this kind of culture that exists. And I appreciate that Sophia Takal and as you said, April Wolf decided to, if you're going to talk about sorority women in 2019, this is not only a hot button topic, this is a realistic topic, and this is a topic that is relevant.
As a matter of fact, I will do you one better. I think at this point, it's almost irresponsible that no movies tackled it. And horror is always the banner, the banner waver for social justice and social change. Horror does have that distinction, and it is nice to see that still true.
Yeah, and as we mentioned at the beginning, this film has done like zero money in the box office, it's a huge shame. And you had mentioned you were shocked that Blumhouse, as a company, that this film might be one of their bigger losses, probably since Jam. Their film that they did about Jam was a huge kind of box office failure. But
shit, I forgot that was Blumhouse.
Yeah, that was his like big jump into like giant cinema, and probably a huge poor choice. But yeah, for our audience out there, that was a huge cringe from Sean's face, like the look of pain on his face.
Especially since that should be such an easy home run, even at a low budget. Like, get a decent makeup crew and just have it be a girl who transforms into a magical pop star. Why do you have to like go in this weird Hannah Montana-ass direction with it? It's sorry.
Yeah, fair enough. Tangent aside. The reason I bring up Blumhouse in this regards is because Blumhouse has been doing a very good job at bringing socially relevant material to horror movies lately. Get Out will be one of the defining films of the last 10 years because of its social commentaries that it has. So I easily see why Blumhouse saw the script and said, yes, absolutely, let's run with this. It's a shame that it didn't find its audience like something Get Out did, and why, even though I do think that this film has some significant flaws to it that we'll get to in a second, particularly in the third act, that it's a shame that this film hasn't found, because it will find its audience. This film will find its audience. Absolutely. And this film, as you said, in kind of its extreme choices that it makes in approaching the topic, which I don't think are as extreme as they could have been. Like I said, I just watched the new Charlie's Angels, which we will talk about in a future episode. But that movie like pounds you in the face with its feminist topics, and in a way that almost puts you off of them versus like makes them endearing. And I think this film actually approaches them in a really smart way in its first two acts, as it introduces these girls and the different character arcs that they have together and how they try to stick together in their different personalities. You have one girl that is very much the activist of the group, and then you have the one who's kind of the shy one, your main character, played by Miss Imogen Poots. And you have a lot of interesting characters in this film. It's just that once everything is on the table, particularly, I think the second act is really well done. I think Sophia Takal directs the shit out of the second act.
And if I may, I am in no way ever going to defend the supernatural aspects of this movie, but I can even see what they were thinking there on the level of they have this bust that is literally spreading masculinity as a toxin. It is toxic masculinity, literally.
Absolutely. You're 100% correct. And I think that that's a fascinating, particularly because it's a bust from an old white man who, at one point, one of them points out he owned slaves in the North. Like that was that's made as a joke. And you're like, well, that's again, it's made as a joke, but you're like,
but as a detail, that's like a really bad detail. I love it.
it's right. It's actually a smart detail in there. And
sorry, when I should say it's just like this wonderfully bad detail, like a wonderful asshole move.
Yeah, right. Like this guy's such an asshole, right? And he's a founder for a college, right? Yeah. And so, yeah, I absolutely agree that I actually, as you mentioned, do not think that the political or social commentary in this film have anything to do with the problems. In fact, I think Sofia Takal directs the shit out of certain scenes. Is the second act with the home invasion, with the Christmas light colors and like the way it's shot and how kind of dark and dingy it looks. It looks like the first.
There's multiple attackers. Like that's a great reveal.
Yeah, great reveal. The guy with the archery kit, how he missed the first shot and they don't know what it is. It's a shock to even the audience.
What? Yeah.
Yeah, and then even the reveal where the campus security gets the call from 911 to go to the house, and they show him speeding, and you think they're going to the house that's being under attack, and he goes to a different one that's being under attack.
And you realize it's happening everywhere on campus. Yeah,
happening at different places. That's a great reveal. I think Sofia Takal just nails it, and especially in the second act. I think the first act gets a little bit tripped up in trying to get its exposition out. Like less is more maybe in times for this film. But the second act, I think, nails it. The home invasion stuff is great. It's visually really interesting. The reveals really work. It's the third act for me where it really starts to fall apart as it doesn't quite know how to integrate the supernatural into the kind of the realistic themes that it has going on.
And on top of that, let me just lay my cards on the table first and foremost. This movie, PG-13 horror can work, and some of the best horror movies ever made are PG-13. That is a fact. The Ring comes immediately to mind, the Verbinski remake. But the slasher genre can't do it. It is just not a genre that can really be done justice in a non-R-rated format to me. So it just suffers on that level.
And you can tell, and what's even more fascinating is that I'm curious if they tried to get a harder cut, because it's revealed in the second act that the guys that they're killing, these masked invaders, aren't even bleeding. It's the black oil toxin.
Shit, yeah.
Right. In which case you then run into, Evil Dead 2 or, to a more modern extent, Samurai Jack aspect of it, where Samurai Jack was able to get away with the violence it had for a kid's cartoon because it was robots and oil and not blood and people. And like, you might have been able to get away with that. And I'm curious to see, once we get a home video release of Black Christmas 2019, whether or not there's extended scenes of violence in it. If we get it like Black Xmas had, an extreme unrated cut,
it would have improved my score at least 1 point, personally.
Oh, I think so too. And I think Takal, as a director, tries to shoot around it in a way that's at least smart in a lot of ways. But I don't, like you said, I don't think it works as well. And in fact, with its messaging, I might have been more tempted to say that the messaging would have been more impactful had the violence been upped.
I'm not especially familiar with her work outside of last year's Into the Dark episode, New Year, New You. But for what it's worth, I actually think that is one of the strongest of Into the Dark's episodes so far.
New Year, New You is not only a great. I hate calling those episodes because they are movies.
They are movies.
Ugh, that's the stupid Hulu thing.
It's the Masters of Horror problem, right? Because each of those is a movie too.
Yeah, but at least those ones were only an hour long. Like, so you could get away with being.
It's the one with Norman Reedus that like Tobe Hooper did was pretty. Oh well, they released a longer cut of it. To be fair,
right? Yeah. They released longer cuts for a lot of them. in there, but a lot of them were cut down to an hour to fit the time slots for Showtime. Whereas like Into the Dark, because they don't have, I mean, it's not actually broadcast TV, right? It's literally something that you click on and watch. They're full fucking movies. And I think New Year, New You, that Takal directed on that, is not only one of Into the Dark best, that is a film that should have been released like not as part of that. Like I think Blumhouse kind of made a mistake in releasing it as part of Into the,
because that could have made a hell of an impact in theaters with the social media culture going on and stuff. Absolutely.
Well, and think about that. Sophia Takal does this episode does this film, New Year, New You, that talks about kind of, you know, the feminine aspect of social media culture, how women view each other on social media. So it's not like bringing in a feminist viewpoint into this film was going to be shocking. It's fucking not. Like if you've seen New Year, New You, this film is almost a really good follow-up to New Year, New You in a lot of ways because it's an extension of those same themes. In a modern sense. And I think that's why when they announced her to do it, I was like, hell yes. Like Sophia Takal is one of the stronger voices in directing right now, especially for horror. I think she's got a really strong viewpoint and almost like a messaging behind her films. And which is why, like, again, Black Christmas 2019 flopping so hard its first weekend in theaters, it's only been out 2 weeks when we're recording this, is such a devastating hit because she is a great voice in horror cinema right now. And having this kind of a hit on her record, I'm sure will certainly to a regard detract her career. But
even looking at her IMDb right now, I haven't seen Always Shine, but it looks really cool.
Always Shine. Yeah, I haven't either. I haven't seen Always Shine, but it looks fantastic. So yeah, absolutely. And so you get to this third act where you do have this element to it of supernatural, and you know our lead actress is or our lead character played by Imogen Poots is taken to or her name is Riley. She's taken to the fraternity and she's tied up and they're explaining their evil plan of alpha maleness, and again I think it stumbles here because it's when it starts doing the evil plan, it just gets super cheesy. It starts to
borderline. I mean, there have been Bond villains that would have been humiliated by this monologue.
Yeah, right. That Carrie Elwes gives, and then they bring in like all these, you know, these frat boys that come in and they're all in the robes and everything. It's at times it's like you said, I get the idea, but it's a little bit baffling in its execution because it does almost skirt around being being a horror movie and kind of slides into an action film. Because you have this big fight where the sorority girls show up in this big heroic moment, and you know you missed with the wrong sisters, and then they start kicking ass and taking names, and they break the bust on the head and burn the fucking frat down. It almost ceases to be a horror movie and becomes a little bit more of an action thriller at this point. And I think that the cheesiness of that tone detracts from the ultimate messaging that it needed to have in the end.
Well, and it runs into the problem a lot of movies like this do when they start trying to be both grounded and then have kind of this supernatural element too, which is, you know, the what do you want to call them? The alpha males, I guess, the initiates, whatever, have inconsistent power set. It's just whatever the screenplay needs them to have for the moment. You know, they can be easily taken out by one of these girls barehanded, or they could be like, you know, benching a car. It's just there's no consistency to it.
Right. And it becomes such a problem in the end that you kind of forget all of the good things the film had done.
Yeah.
Because of the ending. And it's taken me like I saw them film a few days ago. So it's still pretty fresh with me, but it's taken me a few days to kind of sit with it and let it digest and be like, you know what, those first two acts were pretty fucking good. You know, it's just that third act that kind of derails everything. And then you have certain elements of that third act, like I said, the cheesiness that just don't work. And because it's getting you to look one way, you forget all the good things you saw, you know, in the beginning, the first two acts.
Which is too bad. Trying to see if there's any other particular shout outs to the original, because it's not even, I mean, there's not even a Billy, and that seems easy enough when you've got a whole fraternity to have someone named William or Billy.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, well, you have the cat. The white cat was from the original one, same name, Claudette,
Yeah.
which the girl goes looking for. Obviously, there's the scene in the attic with the Christmas lights in this one, which is a nice throwback. You do actually have the plastic bag makes a return,
Yeah.
except it's the girl using it on the guy to pull her off of her sister in it. And I was like, oh, that's a nice nod to it. But again, most of this stuff happens in the first two acts. You get to see those nods to the original one.
And then
I guess after
the original with the black magic ritual in the fraternity. Oh,
no, that's just this one. Well, I was gonna say after Black Christmas 2006, do we need any more Billy? I'm pretty sure we saw so much Billy, way more Billy than we needed to.
that's true. And like I said, actually, Carrie always makes such a better villain, and this movie doesn't need the supernatural thing. You've already got the general kind of cult horror thing with frats and secret societies and all that college shit. That a fair few film franchises have actually spun off. The Skulls, most off the top of my head.
I was just gonna say the Skulls. I was like, I watched like 3 of those fucking films and didn't like any of them.
Oh no,
So,
they're all terrible, but it's the same. But I'm just saying, like, there's already this inherent creepiness to a secret society and to a fraternity that I think you could have gotten the same effect across without. I mean, imagine, for example, the heel turn of the love interest. If there was no supernatural aspect to it, and the guys just offered him a place in their frat, and that's what turned him. Like, how much more powerful would that have been?
right, especially as a guy who you kind of get the idea is like ignored.
Yeah,
Like he invited to the party to begin with because of his mixing board. Like it wasn't like they cared about him, and then to be offered that kind of role. I absolutely agree. I think it would have been, you could have gotten around the supernatural element with it just by having it that way. And even when the
without changing too much, you still have all the pomp, circumstance, and ritual. You just don't have the literal supernatural element because
right,
those kinds of frats do have weird, creepy cult initiation shit.
right, and you can keep Carrie Elwes as the slimy head of this fraternity, as this tenured professor and things like
Because
that.
it does undermine its own premise in a way when you've got, these guys have this power to give every man in the area a migraine that just makes them bro out for like 2 or 3 seconds, as we see with the girl's boyfriend earlier in the movie too. And it's just, like I say, it kind of undermines its own message because it takes out male culpability in some of this shit, and I
Right.
don't like that.
Right, like it's not the guy's fault.
Yeah,
It's this other thing that's making him do it. Well, and I get it. It's an overhanded symbolic meaning, like you said, the literal toxin,
yeah.
literal toxic masculinity that's spread. But yeah, I agree. I think it just kind of it does kind of undercut its own stance on a lot of things because of it. Despite that, I mean, there's a lot of things I do enjoy about Black Christmas 2019, but in the end, it's like that third act.
Bearing in mind, this is, of course, the ever high-minded feminist perspective of two white men in their 30s, but
Yeah, well, you know what? I try to be as much as a supporter of a lot of this, gender equality.
it really, like we're both saying, that's not the problem with this movie. None of the feminist stuff is the problem with this movie.
And it's easily the best part, again, because it's taking something from the original, spiritually running with it, and it's not like the first film didn't have that. I mean, her boyfriend was a fucking dick in Black Christmas 74, and about like
that's a weird thing that all three share, because there's a dick boyfriend in the 2006 version too.
Yeah, but I mean, it's something that you can use, and I think that what Sophia Takal and April Wolf did with taking that spirit and running with it was smart. I think that it was a great way. It's a way to modernize it, give you that social commentary, the Blumhouse social commentary that makes horror in the two, as we just did our top of the decade list, so much commentary, so much really smart, almost throwback to 70s style commentary coming back to the surface. I love it. I love all of it. Give me, even if I didn't love Midsummer in many ways, absolutely give me more of that.
And
like I will.
And part of my specific complaints with this movie is the disappointment that comes with the fact that the two things I love most in horror are gore and cults. And if I can't have one, give me the other, goddammit.
Right. I don't know. I guess ultimately, like, my final thing I have to say on Black Christmas is 2019 is that, yes, it was critically panned when it came out. Yes, it did terrible in the box office, but I feel like if you're a listener out there and have an open mind, give it a shot. You may not love it, you may not like it, but give it a shot, because there are some great things in this film that are worth seeing and that are worth noting, particularly in the Blumhouse model.
Especially like this movie, but I do not feel like I wasted my money. I definitely was entertained for 90 minutes on this one.
Absolutely. And once again, I will lift up the torches and the light for Sofia Takal's career. Mm-hmm. And I hope that this film does not detract her too much, because she doesn't deserve it. She is a phenomenal director. She is a smart voice in horror cinema right now. And I hope that, even after Black Christmas 2019 has met all of these obstacles, I mean, the first one being that it was kind of rushed into production to get it out for December 13th for this Christmas. I get that was kind
Friday
of rushed.
13th, yeah.
Right, to hit that holiday. She is a great director, and I hope that her career continues to just only go up and up. And, whether or not that's something where Hulu gets a hold of her or Blumhouse continues to back her, she deserves it, because I think she's fantastic.
Imagine if Blumhouse had changed their mind and aired this as the Christmas episode of Into the Dark this year instead
of a nasty piece of work.
Yep.
That'd have been interesting. That's a bold choice, because it is a remake, so I'm sure they had to pay quite a bit of money for the rights. But
I mean, beloved to a certain group of people, but so is Silent Night, Deadly Night. Like,
we should come to that franchise. We should do that franchise next Christmas.
We should do that. Yeah, absolutely should.
But all right, so I guess that kind of wraps up Black Christmas 2019 as we're kind of going through it.
So on a franchise analysis level, any last thoughts I have are they all do tackle feminism in their own ways. 2006, obviously the least so, but just inherent to the fact that it's a movie with strictly female leads. The only men in the movie are the dick boyfriend and the killer, basically. Yeah. Even the family member that comes to save the day in this one is an aunt this time instead of a father.
Right. And I think, and to that extent, there's a lot of interesting commentary in these films. I like that each one does take from the first film, both of the remakes take their own pieces that's necessary to make a movie that's relevant for the time period. And I think that's a fascinating thing to see evolve in a franchise, whether it is like you said, the super gory, wildly outrageous post-Scream self-referential feeling of, Black Christmas 2006, or the very modern Blumhouse style of low budget, it's not super low budget, but lower budget filmmaking with a message that Black Christmas 2019 does. They both take the different elements of the original and very much put their own imprint on it for the time period and by the people making it, whether it's Glenn Morgan and his stylistic choices for 2006 or Sofia Takal in 2019. There's a really fascinating, almost universality to Black Christmas that translates every few decades.
And even on a more broad level, one of the things that always fascinates me about this series, and I'd love to hear your take on it, is there is just something inherently interesting about Christmas horror specifically. Because we do say holiday horror, And there are examples for all holidays at this point. You know, you've got your My Bloody Valentines and your April Fool's Days and what have you. But
Critters 2 for Easter. I mean, that's my Easter one.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you need an Easter horror movie, just watch Passion of the Christ.
Bold statements in this podcast.
Regardless, there is something inherently interesting about the Christmas horror movie. There's something about that juxtaposition that's interesting. And whether they go in a comedic direction with it or a serious direction with it, like we do see a fair amount of them. And why do you think that is? What is it about the Christmas horror? Do you think it's just the juxtaposition inherently, or?
Well, I think you know, as you know, our listeners, I'm sure, have heard by now, and if not, it'll be coming soon. But we did that episode on Shane Black, and Shane Black does Christmas all the time, and he also does it as a juxtaposition to the action sequences or to the violence that he is portraying on screen. This idea of peace on earth, goodwill toward man, and horror movies have neither. There is neither peace on earth nor goodwill toward man, and in these three films, really no goodwill toward man. So I think that's an interesting juxtaposition to begin with, but I also think it's something that, you know, looking at like even the history of slasher films, why Halloween worked so well was Halloween was taking something somebody was very familiar with at the time period, which was babysitters and then suburban living. We're finally bringing horror into suburbia, and we're gonna give teen girls the voice, right? This idea of these teenage high school girls, like all women had been babysitters at that point. Well, not all women, but
that was interesting because this was the beginning of gentrification in this country, and suburbia was supposed to be safe. So to make it threatening was inherently interesting.
Right, which is the same feeling, I think, for holiday horror, or in particular Christmas horror. This idea that this is a safe time where you get your family together and it's a time of joy, and you know, we give each other presents because we want to give thanks to each other and appreciate each other, you know. And then you have this, it's kind of ruined by this person, you know, this person or this killer or this monster or whatever have you, be it depending on the film, you know, who brings it down, who brings this like horror to something that's supposed to be non-horrific. And I think that's kind of, and everybody can relate, like, you know, even if you don't celebrate Christmas or for, you know, or anything like that, you can still relate because unfortunately, as a country, we have decided that Christian holidays are going to be the holidays that we celebrate in no other religion. And so that's a whole nother rant for another day. But, you know, Christmas time, even if you don't celebrate it, you understand what it is. You see it everywhere. It's, you know, Christmas music starts November 1st. You get to hear it. You get to know it. So it's something that's there. It's something that you're familiar with. And then to bring the horror to that is certainly impactful. So that would be my take on it. I don't know. I mean, is that why you think the Black Christmas keeps getting remade?
I do, actually. I think that's a good big part of it. I think the other part of it is just that part of our personalities or kind of humanity that wants to be kind of counterculture. And we get so sick of the you know, people out ringing bells and everyone's dressed as Santa Claus that every once in a while you just want to think about Phoebe Cates' dad dressed as Santa Claus getting stuck in a chimney, you know?
Yeah.
To reference Gremlins. So I think it's a little bit of both. But to me, I think that's kind of a very real aspect to it too, is I think there is a piece of all of us that wants to be a little counterculture, especially, you know, genre fans, if we're wholly honest with ourselves.
Absolutely. I actually agree with that. And even going back to Gremlins, like Gremlins is one of the ultimate movies. It's funny that Gremlins is so popular as an American pop culture icon when Gremlins is like inherently an attack on Americana. The small town, this idea that the dad is an inventor and he's made his own business and he's terrible at it, you know, and like it's a very much an attack on Americana, especially like
another one. Suburbia is not safe anymore. It's being attacked by, you know, these goblin miscreants. And what's funny is they take the form in that movie, since it's a little more good-natured, of like vandals. It's like a riot.
Yeah.
It's
And they're
almost sports riot, actually, that scene in that movie.
yeah. Yeah. The movie theater riot. I'd riot at Snow White and the
Snow
Seven
White.
Dwarfs. But it's interesting, and not to go too far into this tangent, because I'm sure we'll cover Gremlins in the future, but Gremlins attacks Americana, and it's all caused because somebody took something from another culture.
Mm-hmm.
And we tried to integrate it into our culture, being the Mogwai, and we don't know how to fucking handle it.
We weren't respecting it.
Yep, we didn't follow the rules, we didn't respect it, we didn't whatever. As an American, that's what we did, and then it caused all kinds of chaos. And I think that's also why Gremlins, I know there's like a counterculture for Gremlins because Gremlins is so popular. There's a lot of people like, oh, it's terrible or whatever. But I think that's why that movie works, is because it is an attack on Americana and the kind of the quintessential American dream culture. And I think that's what makes it interesting. But it's also what makes it a great Christmas film, because what's more quintessential Americana than small town Christmas?
But tagging on to that same thought, that's what I think that's what captured the imagination about Black Christmas originally. And I think because it did spawn, I mean, however you feel about its place in slasher history, there's no denying it was the first holiday horror movie. Like, period. It created that concept, more or less.
Right.
But it's from a certain point of view.
From a specific perspective. This is how, through this lens. No, it's, I think Black Christmas, as I mentioned before, can be redone every couple decades to modernize it, because there's a universality to it. It's very simple at its basics, and so if you just take the simple things, translate it into a modern audience, it'll work. In concept, it'll work. Whether or not horror fans can be super fickle as necessary when it comes to remakes, and they will always be fickle, which is one of the reasons, again, I wanted to do this podcast, because I think franchises and remakes deserve to be seen in their own light, as their own way. And I think Black Christmas is a prime example of all of that it can be translated as a holiday horror, as a horror film, because of some of the basics that it lays down.
All right, rock on. So, since we did pretty much since we did the complete franchise, we are going to rank our movies. So, I think it should be fairly evident from context clues, but what is your official ranking of the Black Christmases?
Christmases. So my ranking is literally in chronological order. Number 1 is the original 74. Number 2 is 2006. Number 3 is 2019. Although I'm very tempted to switch 2006 and 2019, particularly as time goes on and once I get to see Black Christmas 2019, because I will buy it on Blu-ray for my collection. I am a franchise whore. I have to own all of them on Blu-ray. They have to all be sitting next to each other. So I will, which is a shame, because Black Christmas 2006 I do not own on Blu-ray, because it hasn't gotten a US Blu-ray release yet, which is really irritating. I keep thinking to import it, but
even the DVD's been out of print for years.
Yeah, and it's even hard to find streaming online.
Well, because it's a Dimension film. And that is one of those studios that just never got bought out.
Yeah, and they still kind of weirdly exist and don't exist, and might be part of Disney now. Who knows? Everything's part of Disney now. Stupid Disney. Anyway, so as of now, I would say my official ranking is 74, 2006, 2019. Although I could very well see 2019 actually overtaking 2006 eventually, particularly if we get deleted scenes on the upcoming home release.
Whereas, just from the heart, 2019 is number 3. The original is number 2. But I just love me my gory, ridiculous horror. And I do just adore the 2006 version. I've been almost intentionally understated in it to kind of obfuscate where I was going with ranking them. But I really love this movie. I can't disagree with anything we said at any point. It's stupid. It is a stupid movie, but it's just so bloody, and it's not, and it's so stylish, and it's just really kind of garish and in your face, and I kind of appreciate it just wearing its everything on its sleeve.
Bold choice. I like it though. I like it. So I thought for sure you were going to do the same ranking as me, but you
Well,
always throw me a curveball, Sean.
this is just that rare case because it's like I said, if nothing else, that shot of the police busting in and him chewing that mommy jerky in the cookie cutter shapes and dipping it in the milk, and just that close up on his nasty ass teeth with his yellow skin is so good. That is just such an iconically early aughts horror shot, and I love it.
Absolutely. Well, I'm glad. And again, I said it myself. I don't hate that movie. In fact, I'll kind of fight for it in a lot of ways. It's just for me.
And
I,
being entirely frank, like it's not a better film than the original. I'm not crazy.
fair enough. But you're shooting from the heart, and that's what
I'm
matters.
shooting from the heart, but I do like it more. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So, okay, so yeah, so that's our ranking for the Black Christmas films, and hopefully you, the listeners out there, had a chance to watch them all, and hopefully you get to rank them too. Please do not hesitate. Let us know what your rankings are.
Don't please hear our words more than our rankings on 2019. Like we both urged you, see it for yourself and have an opinion. Because at the very least, again, it's a movie that makes choices, and I will always respect that.
Absolutely, and I would even say that a large percent of those choices are good choices.
Mm-hmm.
I will defend that movie, and like I said, I might switch mine out depending on once I rewatch it. Now that I've only been sitting on it for 3 days, I haven't had a lot of time to digest it yet, so it may go up, but at this time period, that's how I would rank it. So I for sure would do that. So, but watch the movies, send us your rankings of the movie, send us your thoughts about it. The listeners out there in podcast land, do we call it podcast land? I don't know. I used to host a radio show and I used to call it Radio Land. So I don't know if that's a thing anymore.
I'd say podcast land. That works for me.
Okay, podcast land, yeah. It's the new island in the new Mario game. It's podcast. Yeah, it's a terrible place to visit. It's a lot of weird shit.
Quite the comment section. Whew.
Ooh, yeah. YouTube land, the worst place ever. So, but thank you guys for listening today. I hope you enjoyed the episode about Black Christmas. I hope you guys have had a great holiday season and have enjoyed what we had to give for the first half of our first year of doing this. We look to be back in early 2020 with some fun episodes for you guys. In fact, I don't even know what we're recording next. I haven't even written that down.
Next is Wes Craven on Good, Bad, Weird, Wild. Or actually, since we always pitch the next episode of the show we're talking about, Charlie's Angels.
Charlie's Angels. Yeah, I mentioned briefly Charlie's Angels before. So early 2020, we're looking to do a Good, Bad, Weird, Wild and Wes Craven. We're looking to do our franchise analysis of the 3 Charlie's Angels films. And maybe a little bit of the TV series. It's been a long time since I've seen the TV show, so I should definitely revisit.
I might, seek the pilot episode, and maybe when they switched out the Angels, but yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So that'll be our next ones. Please don't hesitate to reach out to us again. You can reach us at our email, which is
nffpod.sean@gmail.com.
nffpod.sean@gmail.com. And then don't forget to also look us up on Twitter, and then also look us up on Facebook. On Twitter, we're at NFFpod. Wow.
And also, you can find both of our writing at Blood Brothers Reviews at blogspot.com. .blogspot.com.
Wow, we really need to script this shit or something. Like we gotta. So, anyways, reach out to us. Check us out on all the social medias. You can listen to our back catalog. We now are getting quite the little back catalog up. So please go listen to our older episodes. We've got some good stuff out there. Let us know what you like, what you don't like. We're just kind of feeling a lot of stuff.
And
All right. Thank you so much for listening, guys. Have a great rest of your evening. And don't forget, be like Sean, be a franchise whore, and just watch franchises all the time. And probably love Fast and Furious too much.
No, can't love it too much.
All right. Thank you for listening, guys. Have a great night.